Melissa, just real quick, as a matter of order before we get started, I see that there was a question from Rick about contracting and regional. Do you have a way of copying that question that we can answer it later and I could follow up with him?
I do, Christine.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, it's 4:03. Should we go ahead and get started? Are you ready, Jennifer? Yeah, okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. Good afternoon. My name is Christine Lowenberg. I'm the planning director with the City of Manitou Springs. You are attending the 4 p.m. session of the open house project, the open house for the code update project that the city is engaging. The planning department is facilitating this. Just real quick, let me go over who we are and what we're doing. So as I mentioned, I'm Christine. I'd like to introduce briefly who else is a panelist on this webinar. Myself, Karen Birchtold, who is a senior planner with the City of Manitou Springs. Her area of emphasis as a senior planner is especially focused on long-range planning. So subject matters related to Plan Manitou and hazard mitigation are a particular specialty for her. Melissa Ruth, Jennifer Gardner, and Bruce Main with Logan Simpson are also panelists in the call. This is set up as a webinar through Zoom. As a result of the pandemic, we have limited opportunity to have large group gatherings. And so for this initial process, as we begin this community outreach and engagement, we're utilizing Zoom. For those of you who frequently use Zoom, thank you for bearing with us for just a moment while we go over some of the ways that folks can engage and use this tool. Everyone who is logged on, we can see you. You can see us, but not everybody may see you. So if you are a panelist, everyone can see and hear us, which is us 5. The others of you, when we get to the question and comment portion later in this presentation, we're going to ask that you would please use the raise hand function. You can ask questions in that way. We also have an active chat box. The chat box that does put questions and comments and whatever you have to say or challenges you're having with this presentation to us. We can see it and one of us should respond to you. And then there is also a Q&A section there, and we'll use that for later on in the presentation. Let's see, that's a little bit there. So Menti directions. Melissa, do you want to take that?
Sure. Okay. So the website or the presentation that we are showing is also available on the website at the top of the screen, which is www.menti.com. And when prompted, you can enter the code 6045688. That will allow you to not only see the presentation that we're giving on either a phone, tablet, or mobile device, but also participate in the activity and some of the questions that we'll have later in the presentation.
Okay, great. Next slide. Okay, so the agenda for today's session, first we will talk a bit about what are zoning and subdivision regulations. We'll get into that in the next slide and have a little bit of an activity for participants to take part in. I'll discuss quickly what the project purpose and process is. We have activities throughout, and then we'll cover the next steps and have a Q&A session. So let me start just briefly real quick with the project purpose and process. So what this is we were awarded a DOLA grant that will allow us to go through the process to improve and rewrite the city's zoning and subdivision regulations. Our specific desired outcomes include consistency with Plan Manitou, the ability to modernize our zoning and subdivision regulations. We're hoping to improve and simplify the review and approval time for development applications. We're hoping to ensure that the regulations and the procedures will allow for compliance to development standards. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so your familiarity with zoning code and subdivision codes. We are going to assume that everyone who is on the call has limited familiarity with it. So you can find the city's municipal zoning codes if you go to our website, and there is the government tab, and then from there you can find municipal code, and there we have chapters that are called, we actually call them titles, and they break down our regulatory body into different sections. And so here what we're asking, if you've gone to menti.com, as Melissa suggested early on, you should be able to answer a question. This helps us gauge your familiarity with the zoning and subdivision codes. So we have 6 participants, and that's about right for the amount that are logged on. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Thanks. So what are zoning and subdivision codes? So each community has a set of regulatory guidelines. These are our laws. This is our legal framework by which we work with businesses, residents, and even developers to participate in the community. And so we go through a number of different criteria, including setbacks. I won't read every single one of these to you, but the code outlines our application procedures. It's useful for staff in working with applicants. Helps identify minimum lot size, what can be done on different parcels in different areas of town. What is your use criteria? What's a right by use? What's the character in the neighborhood? Manitou is a community that has a number of neighborhoods that are unique, that have incredible character. Our goal is to preserve that character in a way that the residents desire. And as you can see here, we also talk a bit about subdivision design, parking standards, roads, streets, access, landscaping requirements. So that's what this is. Next slide. So what is the purpose of the update? So the purpose of our update is to bring into alliance our legal framework with Plan Manitou. Our sections in the subdivision title have not been updated substantially since the 1970s. The community has changed quite a bit, as have the regulatory environments that we all exist in. I will note that updates were made to both the zoning and subdivision titles in 2019 that reflected planning for hazards. That's an area in particular Karen Birchtold had a lot of participation and leadership in. We do feel that the code does not reflect current development trends and the needs of the city. And we can talk a bit more later in that in a prior session. We were asked to reflect on that just a little bit more, what that meant. As well, a modern and tailored code is necessary to protect the unique community character and landscape, right? Manitou is unique and it's a gem to preserve. So next slide, please. I'd like to take just a moment and share with you the process and schedule. So our goal in putting together the process for this really is to ensure a quality and engaged process that ultimately delivers adoption of the different modules that we need to update. So really we've broken this down into 2-month modules, if you will, or 2-month segments. In December and January, we were very busy with kicking off the project. It's a great deal of internal conversation, putting together even the logo that you see on here, where code meets community. A lot of engaged conversation between staff and our consultant team. In February and March, this is a 2-month segment that we're in now, we launched questionnaire 1 on the city's website just about a week ago, and that will stay open for, I believe, a couple more weeks. We would like to garner as much participation as possible. We will begin during this period of time stakeholder interviews, so that ultimately will carry through this entire process. The stakeholder interviews really, frankly, won't end when March 31st comes around. At the end of this particular segment that we're in, we're hoping to have a draft assessment report, and we'll be engaged with the quasi-judicial bodies and advisory boards and city council, including the planning commission, to really look at what some of our strengths and weaknesses are and how we proceed. Our goal is that at the end of this year, by November, December, we've delivered to the community a solid set of code revisions and updates that ultimately will successfully move through adoption hearings. So next slide, please. So even before we submitted a grant request to DOLA looking for funds to help us with this project, the city began to think about what are the guiding principles. I'll probably spend the most time that I'm speaking on this slide because this is really important. This is going to help lead us in the right direction to ensure we get the product that the community wants and needs, right? So the first one is ensuring that the code is user-friendly. That sort of goes without saying, but sometimes it's harder to achieve than one might expect. But the code should be easy for the general public, for applicants and administrators to use. The information should be logically arranged. It should be easy to find. We should include language and graphics that are attractive and clear. The second principle, make the right things easy. Again, should be simple, but sometimes can be challenging, right? So development that reflects the long-term planning policies of Plan Manitou should have a streamlined approval process with standards that align with the desired development patterns, right? So no matter what you are doing, we should be asking you the right questions, and you should be able to give us the right information in a way that's clear and concise. Guiding principle number 3 is balancing flexibility and certainty. That does relate to number 2 in some ways. You know, the updated code should balance the benefits of clear objective standards with some common sense flexibility that preserves consistency with Plan Manitou. The update process should increase transparency in the application and approval process, ultimately to provide landowners and the public with predictability throughout the development process. Guiding principle 4 is engage the public, what we're doing right now. This is a very important aspect of our guiding principles and frankly, the entire process. The code is not just a document, it's a process. To ensure long-term success, the code should reflect the input of a broad range of stakeholders from neighborhoods to the development community, as well as the business community. The update process should utilize multiple avenues and platforms to engage each of you, the public, and allow you to participate in shaping the future of the city in a meaningful and constructive way. The fifth principle is right-size the standards and procedures. The code shouldn't over or under deliver. That's a bit of an art. We expect a given level of design. The zoning standards should ensure that the development reflects those expectations. The standards should reflect the unique needs and market conditions of Manitou Springs rather than national trends. As all of you know, Manitou Springs has unique challenges and criteria, even apart from our neighbor, Colorado Springs, that's just a few minutes away. Guiding principle number 6, preserve and enhance local character. You know, just expanding on that a bit more, Plan Manitou articulated a strong vision for protecting the things that makes Manitou special and authentic. So the code should protect and enhance our local cultural, environmental, and historic resources. Guiding principle number 7 is ensure housing for locals. Housing is of a premium, not just in Manitou Springs, but throughout the entire state of Colorado. In Plan Manitou, we stated that the code should encourage a diverse range of housing types and living situations. We should have accessible housing options that meet the needs of residents of all ages, abilities, and income levels. Guiding principle number 8 is encourage sustainable development practices. While this one I can, sum up in 2 or 3 sentences, it's really quite broad. We have tremendous geographic, geomorphological, and environmental constraints on our community. So our code should encourage and incentivize the use of sustainable development practices, site planning techniques, and technologies in all public and private development. This may include adaptive reuse of buildings, low impact design standards, minimize development in hazardous areas, energy efficiency standards should be considered. We have none in our code at this time. And we should look to increase connectivity for walking and biking and reduce reliance on automobiles, as this was a stated value in our community. And the last two, number 9, avoid nonconformities. So any substantive change to the zoning district or development standards is going to likely create nonconformities. So our approach is to explore this in a way that's going to minimize that. And finally, the last one is provide enforceable tools. At its core, the code is a legal document. This is the law by which we do all that we do within the planning department. And whether you're building a deck or you're looking to build out a subdivision, the code is incredibly important. It provides Manitou Springs the authority to regulate and condition the development, but it must be enforceable. And the approach we need to explore should utilize tools that are going to improve, such as reporting requirements, compliance plans, and improve notification procedures in accordance with Colorado land use law. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer is going to talk just a little bit about community character and lead all of you through an exercise or two.
Great, thank you, Christine. This is my favorite part of the presentation. So thank you, Christine, for the great background and purpose and guiding principles. I think, as you said, those guiding principles are a huge driving force in this project, and we're all trying to stick to them very, very closely. So I'm going to go through a little bit of a exercise with you all. So if you haven't already, I think you guys already, it looks like you already all responded to the original question, but we're gonna have a few more Menti questions. So get your devices out and ready. So next slide. In the Plan Manitou Comprehensive Plan, there were a few areas of town that were identified as opportunity areas. And these are areas that have some potential opportunity to support future development, either greenfield, which means parcels that have not been developed previously, or infill development or redevelopment. And they also comprise of the primary gateways to the city of Manitou. So, excuse me, the comprehensive plan identifies some guiding kind of principles or vision for each of these areas. So we'll go into that next. Go to next slide. So Manitou Avenue West End is on the west end of Manitou Springs, right along Manitou Avenue. And is the comprehensive plan identifies this area for future development of, say, restaurants, tourism-based industry, recreation, retail, and general commercial. Also looks at maybe cluster development and a diversity of housing. So next slide. So what we have done is put together a palette of imagery. What we're looking for is for you guys to, let me back up one step. The responses that you see on the screen are from our last session, and we just keep them accumulative. It's like if you were in an in-person open house and you would see dots or responses on a board. We're just adding to that as we go throughout this evening. So, so anyway, there's a palette of imagery off to your left, and what we're looking for is for your feedback on which of these images do you feel depicts the appropriate character for future development of this area, which is that West Manitou Avenue Gateway. So, so you can see on the bottom, across the bottom, we have small mixed use, which can also comprise maybe some adaptive reuse, activated rooftops, public art, wide sidewalks and restaurant space, vertical mixed use with a historic feel, or vertical mixed use with a little more contemporary gateway focus, or none of the above. And as I believe several of you weighed in on this last time, so we've got an additional vote for the small mixed use. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, Melissa. If you did answer none of the above or have additional feedback you would like to give us on that West Manitou or West End Manitou Avenue area, you can type that in the Menti app right now. We won't see the results here on this screen, but we will on the back end, and we can respond to those questions or discuss them during the Q&A if we have some time. So next slide. So now we're moving on to the Garden of the Gods Gateway. This is the gateway to the north and east of Manitou Springs, right in from Garden of the Gods, along Becker's Lane and El Paso Boulevard. This area, the comprehensive plan identified as the gateway from the north and east, but also as a potentially mixed use area, looking at expanded housing, and additional streetscape improvements potentially. So this area is primarily comprised of residential currently, with a kind of a node of commercial more at Becker's Lane and El Paso Boulevard. The south side of El Paso Boulevard is largely open space and parks and recreation. Next slide. So similar to the last exercise, a palette of images, and we're looking for a what you feel best depicts the appropriate character for the Garden of the Gods Gateway. And we have, going left to right, residential streetscape, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, covered sidewalks with street plantings, one-story residential, or varied height building height and architectural style, duplex or townhome development, or none of the above. And you can choose more than one option also, I should mention. So this is great. Looks like residential streetscape and varied building heights is still in the lead, both of those. All right, next slide. Just like the last time, if you chose none of the above or have any additional feedback or comments you'd like to leave on that subject, feel free to type that in at this time. And next slide. So the third area that we'd like to get a little feedback on is the urban renewal area, which is also the east end of Manitou Springs or the East Gateway. This area, the comprehensive plan contemplates pedestrian-friendly mixed-use areas and additional access to Fountain Creek. And I will mention that the reason that we like to do this particular exercise, especially at the beginning of a code assessment or code update project, is to start to make that tie between the comprehensive plan and the land use code or zoning and subdivision regulations, and start to understand how we might be able to instill some design guidelines or look at sidewalk widths in certain areas, building heights, design characteristics for some specific areas. So next slide, please. So that's how your feedback is really helping us kind of shape what these areas should look like and how to write the regulations to achieve that desired development potential. So in this one, again, the urban renewal area, we're looking at from left to right, varied building height, parking on the side of the building, so side or rear versus the front of the building. So we can potentially provide more activated pedestrian space to the front. Activated alleyways or passageways, outdoor dining and detached sidewalks, mid-century motels as an option to the more standard traditional motels or hotels, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, or none of the above. Adaptive reuse is, just to kind of give a little explanation on that one, is taking a building that may be used for a certain purpose currently, such as residential, and maybe it becomes a commercial building, or maybe it was a commercial building and it becomes a multifamily housing building, or, just the use itself changes, but the structure remains the same. It's often seen in more historic building structures where the existing use is not as viable to the economy or so on, and allows for the reuse of that building or that structure without demolishing it. So just a little insight on that one. If you have any other comments or chose none of the above, we'd like to hear your feedback in this section. All right, next slide. So before we move on to the question and answer, I always like to kind of go into the next steps so we don't forget to pass those along. So primarily the most important is visit the website and visit it often. The QR code off to the left will guide you to that website. You can also go to the town or the city's website at ManitouSpringsGov.com. And then it's a little bit long, but /631/Manitou-Springs-code-update. But you can search throughout the city's code website for the code update portion. We do have a questionnaire, as Christine mentioned, that was launched about a week ago. We welcome any and all members of the community to take that questionnaire. It really helps us understand the direction we need to take with this code update. Please tell your friends, family, and neighbors to get involved in this process, to visit the website, to take the questionnaire. We see every community member as kind of an advocate of the project. So as you hear things, just pass the message along. We want to hear from as many people as we can. So. Stormwater wasn't really addressed. So that is one item that we will be looking into. I'm just kind of looking down my list here. There are always some hot topics such as ADUs and parking that will be looked at to make sure that the standards are allowing the right mix of uses in the right areas. Mixed use. There's a lot of mixed use designations in the comprehensive plan. So looking at how the code is responsive to that. If we have straight zones that aren't contemplating mixed use, we want to make sure that those mixes of uses are rolled into the code update. So I think that kind of covers some of it, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a heads up. And some of these bigger topics, such as ADUs and parking and stormwater and such, we will be isolating those topics throughout the process and asking additional questions to really get to the heart of what the right balance is for Manitou Springs. So
if I could just respond to that really quickly, the Housing Advisory Board, which I'm chair of, has been working on trying to promote ADUs to be included in the code for many, many years now, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. However, we have put together a couple of documents that I would like to send to you that are well vetted by at least the board and some community members. And one of them is just common considerations for ADU regulations that we endorse. And then we even wrote an ordinance that spells out what we'd like to see, which of course is not the end result, but could give you some information of what our preferences are that are community vetted to some extent, at least, although it's been a couple of years now. So how would I contact you to email these to you?
All communications on the project should be sent to planning@ManitouSpringsCO.gov. And that way we have all the information that's coming in at one place, and
Okay.
the team at Logan Simpson will get it from there,
So we sent it to you, Christine?
basically.
You?
Just send
All
it
right.
to me. If you have my direct email or my text, just send it to me.
Enough that you haven't even seen any of these. And that's been another issue that our community has gone through. Nothing about Christine, but we've gone through something like 4 planning directors in the last 4 or 5 years. And that really, it truncates how much can get accomplished because it takes so much time, to get up to speed on the community. So I just wanted to whine about that a little bit. Okay.
Fair enough. I came in eyes wide open and ready to embrace it. So that's, I guess, one of the nice things about being local is I understood what the challenges have been. Because you're right, Corey, that makes it hard.
Thank you so much, Corrine, for that, for those questions and insight. Do we have any other hands up? I don't see any other hands up. I do see a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm wondering if Christine and Karen are looking at those. One question was, what time is the council meeting, which we did we confirm the time?
It is March 2nd. It's at 6 p.m. There are a number of items on the agenda. I don't believe the order has been finalized yet, but it does start at 6 p.m. The agenda will be posted, should be posted by 5 p.m. this Friday at the council website. And Pro Tem Fortune, thank you for acknowledging 5 planning directors in 3 years. Yes, that was the number I was given on the first day on the job here. I was a little astonished. Okay, Q&A. Let's look at those. Karen, have you had the chance to look at those? I'm having trouble pulling mine up here.
A little bit.
I can read off. Oh, you want to read off one, Karen? Yeah.
Sure. So there's a question from Pat's about noting we spoke of strengths and weaknesses. What about opportunities and threats? So for threats, what came to mind for me is our natural hazards. So that's certainly something that will inform many aspects of this development code update. Plan Manitou has a future land use plan, and that provides land use categories to inform perhaps some updates to our zoning districts, and those districts should address natural hazards, and we provided some policy guidance for that. I would say in terms of threats, certainly fiscal impacts of changes to the development code are critical to consider in terms of our economic health. In terms of opportunities, hopefully we'll hear a lot about that throughout this process.
Great, thank you.
We do
oh, go ahead.
We do have a couple more hands raised. So Alan, I'm going to allow you to speak and ask you to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Alan Delwich. I live at 210 Villa de Vista, and I have one observation I would think it would be good to expand your notion of stakeholder to people who don't use the code on a regular basis, because my experience through hundreds of planning commission meetings is a lot of confusion comes from those who just aren't aware until they go to the meeting because something comes up in their neighborhood. And so we need to know how to reach other people. And so that's just something, I just think it's a broader thing rather than just people who have used it and gotten frustrated. And then my question would be is, what will your scope of consideration include lighting? So, I mean, possibly a dark skies ordinance or something to prevent some of the controversial lighting schemes that have popped up, especially in commercial areas, because we are such a mixed community with commercial bleeding into residential that you light up a commercial area and you light up 2 or 3 blocks of residential neighborhoods. And so we need to figure that out. And I know that's a hot issue.
Thank you so much. That is a hot issue. And my understanding is that there is an ordinance that's being developed. It has not been shared with me yet. The team that's developing it, I am really looking forward to that. And so that is, so to answer your question, it is something that is in process and ultimately will be incorporated in this. But we'll keep our eye out for it. And Alan, I'll make sure that I connect with you and you've got the opportunity to look at that too.
All right, we've got another hand. Bill, I'm going to allow you to speak and then ask you to go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, one of the things that I've been in, yes, Bill Kennedy at 18 Via Loma, Manitou Springs, Colorado. One of the things that I've always been concerned about with Manitou, given our small population of 5,300 people total, and the reality is that we're almost landlocked to the point where we can't do much about expansion. And the other thing, the biggest one, and I really think we really have to take this into consideration, especially just after hearing from Corrine, the expansion of Manitou Springs isn't limited just by the number of places that we can build things. Our water source is absolutely finite. And we find ourselves in a position where we have to end up buying water from Colorado Springs, and we get our utilities from Colorado Springs at a very high price compared to the residents of Colorado Springs. I think this consideration really needs to be looked at very closely before we start heading off into ADUs and those kinds of things, where we start adding our population, increasing use of our utilities. That's a big concern of mine.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you, Bill. And actually, we had a comment in our Q&A from Jay Graham along the same lines, just to reiterate that.
Absolutely. The environmental constraints are tremendous.
And then Jay Graham, it also looks like you have another question. I'll allow you to speak and go ahead and unmute yourself, stating where you're from, please.
Yes, thank you. My name's John Graham. I live at 9 Dudley Road in Manitou Springs. My comment is a follow-on to a comment made by Mr. Dulwich previously. City Council will be looking at a dark skies ordinance. I believe it'll be the middle or latter portion of next month. So I believe March. I think that's tentative. It would. I think this is something that would be looked at certainly before May. So we'll try to make that information available to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Great. We do have a question in the Q&A. Will PUD zone and/or form-based code be included for parts of the city? And that's a really great question. So one thing that we do when we're assessing this code is we'll present an assessment report to the city with our findings from the stakeholders, from the community, from staff, which are really all stakeholders, to an earlier point made that that's why that question is kind of hard to answer sometimes, because we really see everyone as a stakeholder. This is affecting the entire community. So as far as PUD zone or form-based code, we will present options with that code assessment for potentially probably a blended code format, but we present different options that might work. And sometimes a kind of a form-based or form-based light can work in certain specific areas, such as these opportunity areas. So we'll contemplate that for sure as an option and discuss that with staff, with the elected officials, and the community as to whether how far we need to go, which direction with different types of codes. So thank you for that question. I don't see any other Q&A questions particularly, or chat items.
There is a question about who lives in Manitou. I'm not sure we have a way of polling all of our participants in this Q&A box on that.
Oh, we have a hand up.
Great. So this will be our last question, then we'll wrap up so we can get ready for the next one. Rachel Bowler, I'm going to allow you to speak and ask you to unmute yourself. Ask your question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say you could just tell people to raise their hand if they're Manitou residents. And then you would know how many there were or who they were, actually.
Sure, that's a great point, Rachel. We could do that in the chat box, and then we'll see that. We won't be able to do that in the Q&A box, but in the chat box, we certainly could if folks wanted to do that. And I think that most, in looking through who the attendees are, I only see one who is not. I believe all the others are residents. Great, great, awesome. Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Well, as Melissa said, I think we're pretty well out of time, and really appreciate the thoughtful comments and questions and your attendance and participation. So as we said before, please stay tuned to the website, keep your ear to the ground. We'll have Facebook posts when events are happening. I think Christine can weigh in on some other ways that advertising will happen, but we'll try to keep it as open as possible when we have additional events or outreach opportunities. So,
Sure,
Christine?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll be pretty aggressive in our social media outreach. We will have, through our Plan Manitou mailing list, we will be providing updates that way. We also will have a number of small group meetings that we'll be pulling together soon, as well as through our quasi-judicial and advisory boards. So if you've engaged with me expressing interest in being in an advisory role or in some sort of committee, I have got you, and we will be pulling you folks together in pretty short order. So we appreciate so much, and we're looking forward to delivering. It's going to be a hard process. Let's not fool ourselves. This is going to be a challenging process for the community, but we're looking forward to delivering a process and ultimately a product that hopefully the community will be very happy with. So thank you so much for attending and participating today. All right.
I think that opens us up to question and answer. So as Christine mentioned earlier, we're following kind of standard Zoom protocol. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand or type it into the question and answer portion at the bottom of your screen. And when you do, when Melissa allows you to speak, please state your name and address. And we'd like to keep comments and questions to about 2 minutes so that everybody has a chance to talk. And since we have fewer attendees on this one, we hopefully will get some good conversation going.
And I'll remind folks, when you raise your hand and we bring you over, please be sure to state your name and your address so we know if you're a Manitou Springs resident. While we're waiting to see if anyone raises their hand, we can take a quick look to see if there were questions that have come up. I would like to pull, perhaps if it's okay, a question that came up in our last session that I think is relevant for all attendees. One of our last participants asked, where do we have gaps and needs? You know, where do we identify some of these? And, you know, we discussed, and I think is relevant, talk a little bit about user friendliness. This can be a challenging code to use. We don't have enough graphics. We don't have enough tables. We don't have enough illustrations. There are plenty of ways we can make it much more user friendly. There are places within hazard mitigation that can be improved, including stormwater. One that we did not address in the last group, but I think is important to comment as I was looking back over our notes, has to do with our environmental considerations. We have limited resources. We're in a geographically constrained area. We have limited water resources. What sort of tree canopy do we have? What are we requiring for new home development or redevelopment, business development? What should we be considering? We're in the process of discussing through the Housing Advisory Board habitability standards. And that's currently a gap that we see in there. By the time I think we get to the conclusion of this, the habitability code that's being drafted will nicely fit into this process. We talked a bit as well about ADUs and parking standards. We have some need to address that in an updated code scenario, as well as mixed uses. So I just wanted to pull back that question that I thought was very relevant to all participants. Melissa, do you see? I don't see that anyone's raised their hands. If there are any questions or comments, I would just remind you, please use the raise hand function. We're happy to have a conversation with each of you. I would also like to note, while we wait to see if there's anyone who has any specific questions or comments, that next Tuesday, I will be presenting at City Council along with some members of this team. This will be March 2nd at 6 p.m. An update on where we are, how we got to where we are in this project, and hopefully some beginnings of an insight as to how these meetings today went. You're attending the second of 3 sessions, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., and 5 p.m. We fully expect all participants will hopefully go over to the Manny's tonight and log on to that at 6:30.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd like to just throw out there some other thoughts as well. I know Christine kind of hit on this at the beginning with the what the land use or what the zoning and subdivision codes do, but another piece of this process that we will be assessing and looking into is application procedures. So we've talked a lot tonight about design standards and character and kind of that piece of it, but we also look into are the application procedures working correctly? So if you're applying for a subdivision application or a building application, a site plan, even a shed in your backyard that is over a certain size and requires a building permit, those types of things. We look at all of those applications and we like to hear feedback from the community on how those application processes are working from your side. As well as from the staff side. So we have been talking to staff about from their end how things are working with applications, with the full process, review process, notification of public hearings. We also look into things such as variances. If we're noticing, if the city is noticing a lot of different applications are requiring variances, we as a consultant team will take a look at a lot of those variances and see if there's something within the code that could be tweaked or updated to streamline those processes a little bit so that there aren't as many variance requests needed. So just kind of throwing that out there as well, that is a large component of this process, as well as looking at the uses allowed in each zone district. Those are a very key component of a code update that we will spend a bit of time assessing whether they are current and fit the needs of the community and so on and so forth. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I have 2 more things. A question that was asked in a prior section is if we would be addressing lighting and dark skies during this process. I'd like to share with this group who's attending this particular session. I think that's an important subject matter. There's an ordinance that's currently being developed. It's called the Dark Skies Ordinance. I did check between the 2 sessions, and it does look like something will be coming in a draft format for discussion to City Council in April. And so we can share that, and I look forward to hearing what the community has to say there. And I'd like to remind you, if you have questions or follow-up comments or thoughts, please feel free. You can call us in planning, or if you email us, you can email us at planning@manitou-springs.co.gov. And any information, any references, any concerns that you might have will not only come to myself and the planning team, but will ensure that the team at Logan Simpson also has access to that, and we incorporate that into our process.
Still no hands. I was thinking maybe I could read off another couple questions that we had in the last session. So one conversation that we had in the last session was with regards to what is a stakeholder? And Christine had mentioned earlier that we will be going into some stakeholder meetings here over the next short term. And a stakeholder, usually we see a stakeholder as it could be anyone in the community. But we're really seeking for information on how well the current code is working and what would make it function better. So, you know, anyone who's had experience in development or with the code or other communities and just has good insight into how other communities are working, and that might have some insight into how we might make Manitou Springs code work a little bit better. So that was one question. And another was with regards to zoning code types. So there's form-based codes and PUDs and performance-based codes and traditional codes. And so we often or always look at how different forms of codes could work for Manitou Springs. So we will present to staff and the elected officials when we finish our assessment report what other options could take place for the format of the code. So we will talk about that as a group and figure out what the best format is. Typically, we end up with a somewhat blended format. And form-based code looks at more of the forms of the spaces. So more of a urban environment, you know, your urban renewal area or your downtown area, you know, there may be some form-based elements to that portion of the code, something along those lines. Karen, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Sure. I just thought I'd chime in on the link with Plan Manitou, if that's helpful. And so Plan Manitou has goals and policies across different elements, and then also a future land use plan. And so an example of a tie-in is that there is a policy to promote dark skies lighting. And so staff has recently followed that guidance in a streetscape project. But it's great that we actually will have an ordinance introduced. And so the plan would certainly support that. And we also have a future land use plan and Plan Manitou. That's the first time the city has adopted that kind of tool. And so the future land use plan has what we call land use designations, kind of general depictions of land uses and densities that are somewhat consistent with zoning, but provide more of a kind of forward-looking vision for what we'd like to see in those areas. And we did utilize some of our hazard guidance to help come up with policies so that we can tie our understanding of natural hazards in these different areas into some of our development decisions moving forward. And so through this process, we'll have an opportunity to codify some of those policy guidance pieces into our zoning districts. So that will be a really interesting step for us to take. And the plan also includes opportunity areas that we saw in the survey portion. Those opportunity areas, as noted, are, I would say, areas of some change where maybe there are properties that may be going through redevelopment that we want to look at more closely. And so we'll have an opportunity to do that through this process.
Thank you, Karen.
Anyone else have any questions? It looks like we have a new member that just joined. If you're joining for the 5 o'clock session, we will start that here shortly. It's just we've been doing a kind of a repeat of the same presentation at 3, 4, and 5. So hang tight and we'll get started on that presentation at 5 o'clock.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're nearing the end here. Thank you so much.
Great. Reminder again to stay tuned to the website. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to email the planning department or and please take our questionnaire if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more information as we keep going.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to everyone who participated. Look forward to seeing you again, and take care.
So now we'll open it up for any questions. We ask if you have a question, you can raise your hand with the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or at least it's at the bottom of my screen, but on your Zoom panel. And if you would like to speak, we ask that you state your name and your address and try to keep comments and questions to 2 to 3 minutes. There are only 2 attendees on the call, so that allows us a little bit more flexibility. And if you prefer to type your question in the question and answer portion or chat portion of the Zoom call, we can respond to those as well.
Awesome. While we wait to see if the attendees have any questions, I would like to invite attendees in the call tonight to join us at City Council next Tuesday. We will be providing, I will be providing in coordination with Jennifer and Melissa, and I believe Bruce, to City Council an update on where we are in this particular project, how we got to where we are, and what our next steps are. So we invite you to join us. While we wait to see if there are any hands raised, we had some really good questions. Oh, there is a hand raised. So before I do that, let's address Barbie.
Okay, Barbie, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I was just going to introduce myself. So I'm Barbie Bunn, live in Crystal Hills. I have for 35 years, and I'm on the HAB board meeting. So this is helpful for me. It just puts it in perspective. I don't really have a question, but it does give me a little sense of direction around some of the things that our group talks about.
Thank you so much.
Like enforceability is a part of what we talked about last week.
That is what we talked about last week at HAB. You're absolutely right.
Anyway, so that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. We've had a number of really good questions and comments that have come up in the 2 earlier sessions. And so what we'll do is we'll just take a few minutes. If you have any more questions or comments, please feel free to let us know. But what we'll do is I think just take a couple of minutes to share some of those with the folks who are attending this session, so you don't have to kind of come up with your own questions unless you have some that are specific. So, there was a really good question that was posed actually from a fellow member of HAB in our first session, which is, where do we see some of the gaps and needs? And we talked a little bit about, there are quite a few, frankly, and let's start off with user friendliness. The code can be quite difficult to navigate. We can improve through using graphics, tables, illustrations. That's really the modern approach in code writing. And so we really want to pursue that. There's some aspects of hazard mitigation that could really be detailed a bit more, and we could really tease out. One in particular is with stormwater. Stormwater, frankly, is not addressed in our current municipal zoning code, and so that is a place that we do anticipate some places we can address. Near and dear to your heart, Barbie, will be habitability. We know that that's a place that we're working on that right now within HAB. And, my expectation is that as we get through the substance of the habitability code that we're working on, we will bring that into alignment with the approach we're taking now. So for instance, the habitability standards that HAB has been working on for the last many months, we sat in one of our staff sessions and looked at what are the opportunities we can improve this, because it does in some ways feel like our existing code. How can we improve it from a user standpoint? Where are there places we could include graphics? Where are there places we could include tables? We spoke at length about enforceability. And what does that really look like? We took some specific examples and walked through that. We spoke earlier as well about addressing ADUs and parking standards. We live in a community that is geographically constrained in many ways. Parking is quite limited. There are parking plans. We, as you know, going through the planning process, that is really the entering point for many folks into our parking standards. In terms of parking variances, they go through a conditional use permit. If they're developing a subdivision, that is all addressed should be addressed very clearly. And so that's a place where I think we can improve a bit. And so we seek to do that. Another interesting item that was asked earlier had to do with light pollution and what we would be doing if we were going to be doing anything to address dark skies. That is something that is commonly a part of the planning process. We don't have any guidance in our current municipal code on that. There is, we did discuss in our last, we had the benefit of having Mayor Graham and Pro Tem Nancy Fortune on the call. So we were able to have a little bit of dialogue there about it. But, we acknowledged that we expect an ordinance to come forward to City Council. Right now it's scheduled for April. And so we're really looking forward to that discussion. Staff is working on that now. It's actually planning staff are not doing that, but another department, I believe, is working on that. But planning will have its opportunity for input there. So those were a couple of items that I thought were really interesting and worth sharing with participants in this session too. Jennifer, did you have were there any particular questions from the last couple of sessions? Although I see Barbie's hand is raised. Do you think she wants to say anything?
Might just not have gotten put down.
Oh, it's down. Okay, if you have anything you want to add, Barbie, you're totally welcome. I'd love to have you on this side of the screen all the time. Anyway, Jennifer, did you have any?
Yeah, so we did have a couple of questions earlier. One was with regards to will we be looking at PUD zoning or a form-based code type approach? And the answer to that was we look at all different types of approaches to zoning code. So there's your traditional zoning code, your performance-based, a PUD-based, a form-based. And form-based is speaking more to the forms of buildings. So rather than looking at the uses that would be in that building, it would be about the forms or the characters, the heights, the setbacks, things like that. So, so the answer was yes, we will look at all these different types of zoning codes and assess which is the best for Manitou Springs. And ultimately we will likely end up with a blended format. So, we could use some form-based or form-based light type language in certain areas, such as these character areas that we discussed earlier. So that's just one question that came up earlier. And another one I think Karen gave a really good answer to earlier, and I'm wondering if she could speak to this again. But one of our attendings asked about, we spoke of strengths and weaknesses, but what opportunities and threats do we see? So Karen, would you like to respond to that one?
I can weigh in on that. Thanks, Jen. So what came to mind for me with the idea of threats are the natural hazards that we've identified through our hazard mitigation plan. And we've woven that policy guidance into our master plan. And as we look forward, I think we're all more acutely aware of wildfire and drought these days. And also, oh, what's that? And also, what came to mind for me was assessing the fiscal role of development code changes in our community, wanting to make sure that we attract the businesses that are compatible for our community and will help contribute to our tax base. And so really kind of looking at the fiscal impacts of any potential zoning and subdivision changes. And as for opportunities, I would certainly, I know we'll hear about more opportunities through this process and also through our master plan. We've identified a number of different opportunities, for instance, in our economic development section, transportation, recreation and tourism. So I think we would rely on those sections as well.
Karen, while you're on that topic, do you want to weigh in a little bit more on the role of the comprehensive plan in this process?
Sure, I can do that. So we have a comprehensive plan called Plan Manitou, and it does integrate the guidance and policies from our hazard mitigation plan. So it's somewhat unique in that respect. And so mainly we look at the plan has goals and policies throughout the different planning elements like housing and economic development, and then a future land use plan. And so for the goals and policies, we rely on those to provide guidance for development review to some extent, plans like streetscape, transportation plans, and projects. We pull on the policy guidance from that. With the development code process, we have an opportunity to codify some of those requirements that are pertinent to private property. And so, for example, as Christine mentioned, stormwater is an area we want to strengthen. And we recently updated our landscape standards to focus, to encourage or require actually, a better palette of native drought tolerant plants in our community. And so as for the future land use plan, that is a plan that looks a lot like our zoning map, but it identifies broader land use categories and also addresses density. And so these categories have kind of more of a forward-looking role than our zoning code. And so we currently use these to evaluate some development applications, for instance, rezonings. We will also be utilizing those to help guide some changes to our current zoning districts. And so that will be a clear role where we'll rely on the guidance we develop through that tool, the future land use plan.
Thank you, Karen. That was great.
You're welcome.
Do any of the attendees have any questions or comments? Please feel free to use the raise your hand tool, and we would love to engage with you if you have any questions or comments you'd like to share. And while you're contemplating that, I'll just take a moment to remind folks who are in the audience, because it looks like another person's joined. In less than an hour at 6:30, the Mannies will begin. And so we look forward to seeing all of you online for the Mannies. And it's a great opportunity to recognize the volunteers and folks who are really involved in our community. As well, on our website, we have posted, we've mentioned this before, but we want to make sure if you've joined late, you know that under the projects tab on the city's website, there is a survey that has been posted. It's been live for a little more than a week, and we will keep it up for a couple more weeks. And it's a great opportunity for you to weigh in, for us to get your feedback on a variety of different topics that are related to the code. And we will have future engagement opportunities. We welcome emails or phone calls into the planning department. Contact me directly if you'd like to, or you can contact us at planning@manitou-springs.co.gov. And any information that you have or questions or concerns, I'll certainly be sharing that with our entire team. In our first session, we had several individuals who had some information that they thought was very pertinent to what we're doing, and I've already received 2 emails in the short time, so I'm excited about that and would encourage you if you have any information there. So.
Yeah, and also I'd like to mention that this presentation we gave this evening, there will be a recording of it available on the website, as well as the visual presentation will be loaded to the website and allows for the exercises. So for those of you that joined a little bit later in this meeting, there was a few questions that we asked during this open house session this evening. And there is a website and a link that will allow you to interact with those questions. So you need not worry, you can still interact with those. And I don't know, Melissa, if you still have the website up, or the website and the code that you could list off for them, but it will also be available on the website in the next.
We'll make sure that it's on the website. I'll make sure Alex, our PIO, has that information. If he doesn't already, I think he does, but we'll just make sure. So, okay, well, there are no more questions or comments from folks that are in the audience. We thank you so much for participating and joining us this evening. Community's input and involvement in this is critical to our success. And so we appreciate all of you joining us today for this session and the 2 prior. With that also, thanks to the folks at Logan Simpson. We really appreciate all of your hard work and walking alongside us during this. So, thank you and have a great evening.